So this brings us to some of the tools that we use. Once you see these parts of yourself that were unconscious, once you learn to see them, what are you going to do with them? How are you going to integrate them into a greater, more complete sense of self that is whole and vibrant and alive? Well, we've cultivated a number of practices, which are really processes. The one that I love, and the one that I've spent a lot of time developing, I call the conflict liberation process. So this incorporates something that Jung called the transcendent function, and it incorporates many things. What we notice when we find a conflict is we always can see one side of the conflict, we can see our side of the conflict. And many times we see the other side of the conflict as something outside of ourselves. Oh, I'm in conflict with them. So this is a conflict between me and them. Well, if I stop right there and just get rid of the notion of self, if I drop into the silence of absolute selfless clarity and emptiness, then I can see that there is no me and there's no them. There is no my position and no their position. And I can begin to dig deeper. And I can learn to see that my side of the conflict, what I thought was my side of the conflict, is in consciousness, in my consciousness. And I can learn to see that what I'm accusing them of, I'm blaming them for their side of the conflict, is in the unconsciousness. I'm not aware of it. And there's a dynamic tension inside me between my side of the conflict and their side of the conflict that resonates with something that's in me, with my shadow, individual or collective. So what we begin to do is make both sides of the conflict visible in my experience. We allow the conflict to polarize, and we help both sides of the conflict come into consciousness inside me. And we see that this conflict that I thought was a conflict with them is really a conflict that started inside me. This is Jung's process. This is a process that we bring to life in our experience. This is part of the conflict liberation. And when it polarizes in our experience, in our direct experience, there will either be a breakdown and we'll run away, or there will be a breakthrough that is profoundly liberating. The breakthrough to a higher sense of self that can now see both sides of the conflict as an object. Oh, I thought that was in them. I see that it's also in me, and I was just projecting it onto them. Oh, I've always known this was my perspective. But now I can see that both sides of these conflict, I can see them from a higher perspective. I can see them both as objects. And then I can integrate them into a higher sense of self that has now liberated itself from this conflict. So this is using Jung's transcendent function in a very specific way that is from witnessing mind. This process evolved out of a process that my teacher created that he calls Mondo Zen. Now, Mondo Zen is a beautiful way of deconstructing our ego and attaining a state of witnessing mind of pure freedom. And then that was the first part of the Mondo Zen process. My teacher Junpo called that the ego deconstruction process. And it's a beautiful technology. It's incredibly powerful. And we use it all the time in Integral Zen. And we honor it deeply, as well as Junpo, who created it. What happened next in the process of Mondo Zen is what he called an emotional koan. And this is an incredible process. We're actually taking our understanding of emotions as information that Junpo presents in Mondo Zen, and we're using this information to see our shadows, integrate them, and liberate ourselves from their negative impact. It's an extension of the Mondo Zen process that requires a little more integral understanding and some specific understanding of shadow work that we've been sharing. So it's really an extension of the Mondo Zen process, which has been profoundly transformative in my own experience. Another tool that we have in our toolbox is a tool that Ken Wilber developed that he calls 3-2-1 shadow work. And he told me in a conversation one time when we were chatting about shadows and shadow tools, and I was explaining how we use 3-2-1 shadow work in Integral Zen. He says, oh my goodness. He says, you're not doing 3-2-1 shadow work, you're doing 3-2-1 0 shadow work. And what he meant by that is, again, we're introducing Zen into the shadow work. We're cutting away everything that's not the deepest truth of who we are, absolute clarity, Zen mind. We're looking from this pure, selfless, witnessing mind at shadows. And we're using 3-2-1 shadow work from 0. We're dividing by 0 first. We're rebooting. So that's another tool that we use. The voice dialogue that I've explained a little bit is a profound tool. It's a very, very developed and useful tool that we use in Integral Zen. We also use an extension of voice dialogue called parental bonding patterns. This gets into the underlying roots of ego and shadow that are formed in our earliest relationship with our caregiving parents. You know, especially our mother, whoever is our primary caregiver, whether it was our mother or our father. In this postmodern age, it's not always self-evident. You have to ask. But the relationship between that primary caregiver and that infant is where the majority of our psychological structures, the foundations, are laid down. So bonding patterns is a way of really exploring this territory, what has become known as attachment theory, another very popular way of doing trauma work by dealing with those early insecure attachments that are laid down in the first 18 months of life. The foundation upon which the sense of ego and all its delusions and the sense of shadow are formed. They're built on top of this foundation.